Is it simply a matter of time before Zuffa Boxing monopolises the sport that we all love? Welcome back to The Fight with Tom White. Today, I'm doing a full analysis on a topic that I did a Sunday ramble on a few weeks ago. Let's get to it. The formation of Zuffa Boxing, a joint venture between everybody's favourite 1980s movie-style corporate bad guy, I'm of course talking about the TKO group, and Saudi Arabia, or Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Authority to be specific, has more than ruffled a few feathers, from forecasted fighter pay down the line, dramatically lowered financial ceilings even for the biggest stars of the sport in the future, and concerns about 50-50 matchups too early in fighters' careers. Everybody from Roy Jones Jr. to Eddie Hearn to Oscar De La Hoya to one of Muhammad Ali's relatives, Nico Ali Walsh, they've all piped up to have their say. And on the whole, it's not good. Of course, Zuffa's frontman, Dana White, can simply dismiss those guys as jealous rivals, well-meaning but misguided fools, and a whole host of other pejoratives that are far more aggressive.
No, I didn't say that. You said that.
But one thing he can't call them is a liar, because the proof is in the pudding that he's already made, and that is the UFC.
There will be a Zuffa belt, and then there will be a ring belt. And yes, I will not recognize any of the other sanctioning bodies.
Those detractors, like Eddie Hearn, know exactly what the planned changes to the Ali Reform Act would mean to, for one thing, fighter autonomy. And they know full well why Zuffa are overpaying their marquee fighters now, and why that will almost certainly not continue in the decades ahead. It's a classic monopoly strategy. Now, I'm not naive. I know full well that someone like Eddie Hearn would do the same thing if given the opportunity. Now, alright, a closed league is a very American thing and not particularly British, but if Eddie Hearn could control the sport in a different format, I'm sure he wouldn't say no out of some kind of strong conscience.
Dana is right. The fighters in boxing are vastly overpaid.
In other words, he's not in the sport out of charity. But given the absence of any of his previous fighters complaining about pay, I think he definitely deserves the benefit of the doubt. Especially when you contrast that with the UFC, which seems to have a new pay-related lawsuit being levelled against it every few months. Lawsuits that they also seem to end up paying up on. Because in their minds, paying out hundreds of millions of dollars today to disgruntled former fighters is cheaper than changing their business model long term, which shows you just how big the margins are. To lay it out in black and white, top boxers get up to 80% of the show's revenue, all in all. UFC fighters, even the stars, are strictly capped below 20%. And while yes, the middle tier UFC guys can often make more than mid-tier boxers, it doesn't really address the discrepancy. But from a strictly business sense, it's a very sustainable model. And it does seem that rival promotions in the MMA world start out with the best intentions regarding pay, only to realise a bit down the line that they can't afford to keep that up. But even basic mathematics shows that the UFC, given its almost total monopoly status at the top level, could pay its stars 2 or 3 times more and still make a massive profit each year, especially with the new Paramount deal. More than that, it could actually pay every fighter on every numbered card 3 times more and still make a massive profit. And this is where the TKO Group Playbook really comes into focus. You just have to look at what they've already built by merging the UFC and WWE under one roof to see the endgame for boxing.
Listen, at the end of the day, this is like one of the biggest mergers in the history of sports.
They're not just trying to become another promoter, swimming in the alphabet soup of the WBC, the WBA, the WBO, and the IBF. They want to buy that pool and drain it entirely.
Is there going to be a Zuffa belt where like the winner of the Zuffa belt has a springboard into like Riyadh season and a championship fight, a Ring Magazine fight?
And in some ways, that's actually a good thing. One champion, no confusion. The long-term plan is a closed league system, a unified roster, or stable to keep things strictly British. One set of belts and total control over the matchmaking, the broadcasting, and maybe most importantly, the athlete's commercial rights long term. Right now, Saudi Arabia's money is acting as a battering ram. They're overpaying massively guys at the top to break the market and force the legacy promoters to the table. It's a hostile takeover disguised as huge historic paydays that people can't really complain about. But the second that Zuffa Boxing establishes this monopoly and becomes the only real viable path to a world title, those massive purses will disappear overnight. The WWE model proved decades and decades ago that you don't need to pay the talent the lion's share of the revenue, or even half of it, if the brand itself is the main draw. People tune in for WrestleMania regardless of who's on the poster. The UFC took that exact blueprint and perfected it in combat sports, making those famous 3 letters, UFC, a bigger star than any of the fighters.
What?
If TKO can pull this off with Zuffa in boxing, they will immediately standardise the pay structure, strip fighters of any independent sponsorships, just like the UFC did with the Reebok deal in 2014, and drag that massive 80% revenue split right down back to the UFC's 16 to 20%. And to get there, they don't need to beat the remaining power brokers. They just need to buy them out or absorb them. Which is exactly why someone like Eddie Hearn is currently playing hardball. It's to drive the price of matchroom boxing through the roof for a potential buyout in the coming years. 2 years, 5 years, I'm not sure exactly, obviously, but at this point it all does seem rather inevitable. Eddie Hearn would likely get a seat on the TKO board and a fancy job title like CEO of International Boxing Operations and, of course, a ridiculous amount of money from any deal.
Show me the money!
It is impossible to put a percentage on how likely any of this is of happening, but it's certainly being attempted as we speak. That is the goal of TKO Group and the Saudis, and with the cash reserves in both of those entities, it really does feel like a case of when and not if. Even without Middle Eastern funding, TKO Group have the financial muscle to make it work. But with the Saudi Arabian money, it turns from a 20-year project into maybe a 10-year one, maybe even less. The irony of it all, though, is that for the fan who's interested in seeing regular competitive fights, seeing the top contenders fight each other without any friction, it's good news. Personally, I often romanticise the history of the sport. I love that everyone in the Western world was under no doubt that Jack Johnson or Jack Dempsey or Muhammad Ali was the heavyweight champion, that Jake LaMotta or Ray Robinson was the middleweight champion. I mean, that's cool, and I think it could put the sport back where it belongs, particularly in America, where aside from a handful of huge names, it's been totally eclipsed by MMA, particularly with Generation Z and the younger millennials. But the issue is, they're not going to be able to make those changes without exploiting the boxers, as is typical of any monopoly of that sort. If they make Zuffa the only game in town, or at least the only game in town worth playing in, as they've done with the UFC to a large extent, lawsuits notwithstanding, then there's no incentive to pay well, really. The fighters have next to no leverage. And maybe you don't care. Maybe what the fighters get paid is an irrelevance to you. After all, for many people, they're just Saturday night's entertainment, right? But I do care. I think it's a moral case. And I don't really know why, but it's an issue that I do genuinely feel really strongly about. Boxers, MMA fighters, these guys, they really do deserve the money they get paid. And it's a short career after all. And I think a fighters' union is long overdue. Other sports, including in America, have unions, and it's why the NFL is in a roughly 50-50 revenue split with the players. But I want to know where you stand on this. Does a unified, Zuffa-run boxing league sound like an absolute dream for you, as a fan? Or is the lack of a fighters' union or loss of fighter autonomy, or is that drop in fighter pay, a deal breaker? Or are you a bit like me and you like the sound of, one champion per weight division and maybe in fact a few less weight divisions overall, maybe that's a conversation for another day. But you'd like to see it a bit fairer for the fighters if they do indeed bring in a UFC style structure. Let me know in the comments. If you want more of the business side of combat sports broken down, then please hit the like button and make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you in the next one.